Welcome back to the Thinking Crypto podcast. With me today is Congressman Bill Huizenga. Congressman, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Tony.
Congressman, there's lots to talk about as it relates to crypto. But before we get there, I would love to get to know you a bit better. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
So, I grew up in Michigan, and you can always tell Michiganders because we walk around like this, pointing at our hand where we're from. So Detroit's down here. Chicago's down over here. This is Lake Michigan. You got to get technical. Here's the Upper Peninsula as well. But I grew up over on that west side of the state, about midway up the Palm. And it's a couple of great areas, small towns, Holland, Zeeland. And it is very unique. It's very entrepreneurial, forward thinking. We're home to the three largest office furniture makers in the world. So I'm always curious when I'm on with a screen like this, I'm trying to figure out who made your chair that you're sitting in. I'm sitting in an Aeron chair. So if anybody listens is an Aeron fan, that's made in my hometown of Zeeland. So that's where I grew up.
That's awesome. And how did you get into politics? Was it something you dreamed of growing up, or were you looking at another career?
Yeah, my dad was involved in city politics. He was on the city council for over 30 years. To be honest, I was going to outdo my dad. He was the vice mayor of the town of 6,000, and I wanted to be mayor at some point. I wanted to see if I could one up dad and become mayor of our little 6,000 person town. Turns out I never became mayor, but I did serve as the state representative for the area, and then now obviously in this position. But, interestingly enough, like a lot of families, my family had diverse political opinions. My mom grew up on the other side of the state in Flint, Michigan, and very traditional Irish Catholic family. My grandfather was part of the first original sit-down strikes that helped create the United Auto Workers, the UAW. And dad was a good Dutch Protestant who was very entrepreneurial, kind of not rough or anything, but just kind of serious minded on those things. So the Irish side of the family was way more fun. The weddings, everything was a lot more fun than than that Dutch side. But the upshot is they didn't always agree politically.
Sure.
And my earliest political memory is, and I was pretty young. I remember my dad and my mom, and my mom had been married before, so I have an older half brother and sister. And they were in high school, and this was in the early 70s, and they were arguing about some place called Vietnam, something called a Watergate, and some guy who my dad knew who had just become president of the United States, Gerald Ford, because Gerald Ford represented our area in Congress for a period of time. Right. And I remember pounding on the table and going, "What is a Watergate?" Because I couldn't figure out my little head, but some sort of sluice out in a field. That was when my family figured out I was kind of a weird kid. I was paying attention, but for whatever reason, I was just created this way. I've always found it interesting. I like learning. I like learning something new and different. I like people, but I also like trying to figure out solutions, right? And understanding an issue, dissecting an issue, and then trying to figure out what that's going to turn into. When I graduated, I ended up getting a degree in political science, but my family's in construction, and I always had a fascination with real estate as well. And so when I graduated, I got into real estate full time, and my family has done a little housing development type stuff and condominiums. Nothing too major, but it was always an area of interest. So I was able to do that and yet volunteer for a lot of the local political races and that kind of thing. So was doing that, was happy with my life. I was going to be a partner at the real estate firm that I was in. I always kind of thought maybe I would try elective politics later in life after I had established myself and had a family and hopefully made a little money and, viewed that more as of a retirement thing. And my predecessor came knocking, asking if I would join him as his district director. So it meaning I could stay in Michigan, and I was going to do that for only 2 years. I was going to transition him, get him through the next election. 2 years turned into 6. I loved it. I just knew I wasn't done with it. I had the opportunity to then run for the state legislature. In Michigan, it's pretty much a full-time job. You represent about 95,000 people or so, and ran for Speaker of the House in the state of Michigan, came in second, was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. You will learn way more in life from your losses typically than you do from your wins. And I learned a lot in that process. And then when my predecessor decided to not run again, I threw my hat in the ring for a 7-way primary, which I ended up winning by 664 votes out of almost 103,000 votes that were cast. So it was a lot of hard work by everybody in the family, and but it's been very rewarding.
That's amazing, and I love the little nugget there, right? You learn from your failures, and while it may seem that that was something that did not pan out for you at the time, it worked out well. So really great stuff.
Yeah.
Let's talk about crypto and what's happening in the markets. And, maybe instead of getting into FTX and SBF directly, let's talk about the larger theme. And that is the United States got the internet right. And it was well-balanced regulations, and that led to economic growth and jobs and so forth. How can we get it right with crypto? Because there seems to be a lot of confusion, regulators not on the same page, Congress not entirely on the same page. How can we get it right?
Yeah, I would only amend that, Tony, by saying Congress not anywhere near on the same page. All you got to do is look at the hearing yesterday, where you've got my chairman of the subcommittee that I'm the lead Republican on, our capital markets subcommittee, Brad Sherman, calling for the abolishment, I should say, the abolishment of crypto, of all crypto. And a couple of other, today we had a hearing with the head of the CFPB, the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, Rohit Chopra. And a couple of my colleagues were echoing similar themes about that, about consumer protection, and that the only way to protect consumers is to not give them that option or choice of being involved in crypto. And I've tried to tell a few folks that that's just not even realistic.
Right.
Set aside whether it's smart or not, it's just not even realistic. So we've got a real issue now. The Republicans on our committee, back a number of months ago, earlier this year, we got together and we kind of hashed out a few things. And you probably have seen this. I know you've had Tom Emmer and some other folks on your podcast. The statement that we came out with, sort of this pathway, this principle statement, was a lot of hard work, and trying to drive consensus. And so while we may not quite have consensus on the Republican side, I think we're way closer than what we see out of the other side of the aisle, with a Brad Sherman saying absolutely ban it, and Richie Torres on the other, within the same party, but completely on the different end of the spectrum, with taking Gary Gensler to task on what he's been doing. So it's going to be difficult. And now add into that, we've got a lot of colleagues who are kind of coming up to us, those of us being on the committee, and saying, so what's up with this crypto thing, right? Not everybody's at the same education level, and I trust me, I would not argue that I'm the world's foremost expert on this. I might be that part of the iceberg that's sticking up above the waterline on my knowledge base, versus that deep knowledge that a number of other folks have. But you've got some folks who really haven't had this in their vernacular, in their thought process, and we've been wrestling with this, frankly, for years in committee. So it's going to be tough. And in that absence or in that vacuum, we've seen Gary Gensler assert himself and saying he's got all the tools that he needs. Don't worry your pretty little head, Congress. I'll handle this. Well, that's not how this works. And I will, on a side note, point out that when he was head of the CFTC, the Trade Commission, he viewed crypto as a commodity,
right?
Pretty much. And now that he's head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, voila, crypto is a security, and that he believes he should have preeminence in regulating it. And the simple truth is, Tony, Congress, even as difficult as it's going to be, we've got to be the start of this process here. It cannot just be left up to regulators to make it up out of whole cloth.
Yeah, absolutely. Congress makes the laws. And look, folks are not happy with Gary Gensler and the SEC because there is a lot of confusion, lack of transparency. Yeah. And folks in the industry who are building, entrepreneurs, are waiting for the clarity and for the SEC to get it right. What are your thoughts on the SEC missing FTX, even though Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX officials met with Gary Gensler? They missed Celsius, they missed Voyager and Terra Luna, the loss of billions of dollars, but Kim Kardashian is the highlight of the year. It just seems ridiculous.
Yeah. So wait a minute. So we were saved from Kim Kardashian, but we kind of missed SBF. Whoops. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so I think it actually underscores the point when he's claiming he's got all the tools that he needs. Clearly, he doesn't. And clearly he didn't see those red flags and we don't know exactly what his thought process is on this, because Tony, this might surprise you and your listeners, but Gary Gensler has not been in front of our committee, the Financial Services Committee, which is the primary oversight committee of his work, since October of last year. Wow. Okay, so it's been 14 months since we've seen him. Interestingly enough, if SBF had actually made the hearing yesterday, he would have been there more often than the guy that was supposedly regulating him, because we saw him last December. So it's certainly a challenge as we've been going into this. You've got the Ag Committee, which traditionally has had commodities under its purview. I would argue that this is a different animal, and they may not have sort of the background and the equipment available to them to deal with it the way that financial services is going to. And look, in Washington, traditionally, as we've been dealing with these issues, we've had to just figure out whether they're fish or fowl. Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out crypto is more of a platypus, right? Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of the attributes of both. And, it's a mammal laying an egg. And it kind of depends on how it's applied, really, as to whether it's a security or whether it's a commodity. So we're having to work through that. And I understand, Gary Gensler is taught this as a class. He's had it out on the web. He's a very smart guy. I am not taking that away at all. Right. But very smart people sometimes think that they have all of the answers and the only answers. And that's a recipe for disaster, in my opinion.
So a lot of folks and the questions came to me to ask you, how are you and your colleagues at the committee going to keep the SEC and Gary Gensler accountable? What are your plans for 2023?
Yeah, well, I can guarantee you that it won't be 14 months between visits. Okay, I mean that's part of our primary function here in the House of Representatives is to have oversight. The other is to control the purse strings. Now, the SEC and some of these other regulators have some self-funding mechanisms from fines and different things that they deal with. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to work through that, but they still come to us with budget requests. We can put things in called enabling legislation or limiting language. Enabling it would mean SEC, you must do X. Limiting language would say, SEC, you may not use this money to do Y. You can use it for other things, but you can't do this certain thing. So that's going to be the primary tool, is looking at the oversight side. There is potential for some legislation. You know, we had been getting close on a stable coin that Patrick McHenry and Maxine Waters had been working on. And frankly, there was some expectation that we were going to be dealing with that this calendar year yet before this Congress is out. Just a reminder to everybody, we get seated for a 2-year Congress. So when this Congress ends on December 31, all the bills that have been introduced go away. All of the legislation that had been proposed no longer exists. And then in January 3, when we get sworn in, we have to start all over again. And that'll go for that 2-year period. So there was a lot of work that had been done on it. There was some, I think, opportunity and optimism that we might be able to at least start down that path of clarity. And then, frankly, FTX happened, and the beginning of November, when that all fell apart, it just sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Yeah,
for sure. And on that note, did you meet with Sam at all? And what are your thoughts on the collapse? Obviously, outright fraud.
Yeah.
And there's some that are trying to pin it on the digital assets, the blockchains, the cryptos themselves, but this was commingling of funds and wire fraud and so forth.
Yeah. And I do want to, before I did meet with him, and I want to touch on that, but that is, again, part of our challenge, is trying to explain to people what the underlying technology and the blockchain technology, which is going to help not just finances, real estate, medical records, all those things, that technology that has enabled crypto is different than crypto.
Right.
And they don't necessarily know that or see that or understand that. And so I felt like that's been part of my job, is to go out and explain to my constituents that, this technology is a very valuable technology, and we cannot just offload the technology because we had this terrible, bad situation of fraud happen with FTX. So a year ago in December, SBF was coming into the committee along with a couple of other folks, because I was the senior person on the subcommittee that has jurisdiction. They requested a meeting. It was going to be a 30-minute meeting immediately before the hearing that he was going to be in. And he was about 15, 20 minutes late. Came in with his dad, actually, and some other staff folks. Now, there's an interesting piece to this, because it was part of a question that I asked yesterday, and why I bring his dad up. But his dad is a very prominent Stanford law professor, as is his mother. Yep. And ironically, tax law is one of the things that they teach.
The irony.
And this writes itself. I mean, this is just like, Hollywood. It's unbelievable. And I found him, frankly, to be very arrogant, very sure of himself, very smart, obviously, very, very smart. And subsequently, I've heard some stories of people who had interacted with him on a regular basis, or they had been courting them to invest into him. Some did, some didn't. All of them pretty much had the same story. And one of the stories that came to me sort of illustrating this was when he was asked about whether he had a board of directors or an outside board of advisors. He became very indignant and said that you don't understand how insulting that is to me.
Wow.
Well, you know what? Guess what? Being a math quant is not something everybody can do, but neither is actually running a business. And this is a business. And clearly they were not ready for that by any stretch of the imagination. So, how his dad figures in that, one of the sort of unknown, unanswered questions is, what was the role of his mom and dad? Both of them were highly qualified to be able to work in this space. His dad was on a podcast at one point talking about how they had no legal representation, and basically out of necessity, he was advising him. So I asked John Ray yesterday about whether there was any evidence of that interaction, Slack messages or whatever, any emails, anything. And he did acknowledge that his dad had been compensated, which had been reported at least in much of the paper. But that it all ties in, because you would think having someone with a professional background and should have a professional opinion about what was happening at this company that he was drawing a paycheck from,
right?
Whose son was the majority shareholder of, clearly was reaping benefit from that with, the real estate in the Bahamas and other things. It just sort of builds the case for, like, this is more than just someone being asleep at the switch, as the old phrase goes, which is basically what SBF has been saying. I effed up. Well, that would, by the way, was going to be his opening line for his testimony. I effed up. Okay, great legal defense.
Yeah.
And by the way, massively disrespectful to the whole process of what we're trying to go through. So it's more than that, and that's what John Ray was indicating. This is just good old fashioned fraud in his opinion, and I think the evidence is leading in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things that were happening there just blows me away, that they were operating the way they were, and the commingling of funds and the insider trading that was happening on Almeida's side, and then when they found themselves in a hole from bad trades, start taking customer funds to make up for the losses. Pretty unbelievable. And they were using QuickBooks for accounting.
Yeah, nothing against QuickBooks, but you're not going to run $1 billion multinational with international division and domestic division on QuickBooks. You're just not. You shouldn't, but they tried apparently.
That's crazy. Circling back to the SEC. I wanted to ask about how, and maybe you could take us behind the curtain as far as the process. So Congress makes the laws, pass the laws, but how do you get input from the SEC and the CFTC? And how is the gap bridged for, is it a subcommittee? Is it your committee?
Yeah.
How do we get folks in the same room to say, okay, let's put together comprehensive regulations that are not draconian?
So unfortunately, we've seen more and more of this where the regulators have just been sort of doing this in a silo. They've kind of been doing it on their own. Now, there have been times, and just being honest, it is easier when it's a administration of your own party. There's a little more philosophical alignment, maybe a little more trust, a few more relationships. And we can, for example, request out of the Fed or Treasury or SEC or CFTC, we can request technical assistance. In other words, they're not going to say, here's the bill that you ought to introduce necessarily, but they will take a look at things that we are proposing and that we're looking at and what needs to be tweaked. And we'll get that information from practitioners, from think tanks, from sort of outside groups, and also sort of the experience that we have, as we'll have someone come and say, hey, there's a problem with X or Y, and we'll have to start addressing that. To be honest, Tony, the situation I've found myself in is the SEC really hasn't wanted to talk to us. They pretty much think that they've got it all handled. There have been just a flood of rules that have been proposed by this SEC. It's in the order of 30 new rules that have been proposed over the last year, a little bit over. And each one of those rules traditionally would take months to sort through, work through, write responses to. And they've been having, initially, they were having comment periods as short as 60 days to 90 days. And traditionally, those have been more like 120, if not longer. At least 90 days, if not 120, if not 150 days, and that has just been rushed. And so in fact, there was a new rule that one of the commissioners was commenting on, that it was one new rule, but it was fitting in with 3 other proposed rules. And when you take the totality of it, it's suddenly going in a very different direction. So you have to see the whole picture of it. And we've done very little in the way of market capitalization and allowing the liquidity in the market to kind of work. We have not done much as far as supporting entrepreneurs. We've done a lot on consumer protection, which is a good thing, but it's got to be in balance. Right. And we've got to also look at what's happening in our capital market space, because as people are going through and looking for liquidity to be able to expand a business, to do their investing, we need to make sure that we're having a system that works. And so far, we've got the system that is the envy of the world, as they say. But now we've got a commissioner who is trying to pretty radically change that, and we in Congress haven't had an opportunity to ask the tough questions in an oversight scenario.
A kind of awkward question for you, and I don't know if there is any validity to this, but can folks vote to get Gary Gensler out of office in any way? If he's a public servant, our tax dollars are going to fund the SEC and all the things. And yes, they do collect fees and all that. But let's say he's not doing a good job. What is the recourse there? Yeah,
the recourse is it is a presidential appointee. That there is confirmation that happens from the Senate. That did happen. But he is a presidential appointee. He's been approved by the Senate, and the only person that can remove him is the president, because I don't believe he's subject to impeachment, which set aside a lot of the stuff that you've heard or thought about over the last couple of years about impeachment. Impeachment was a very little used and serious issue. Mostly it was like with judges who had ended up breaking the law and perjured themselves and were guilty of crimes, those kinds of things. But an impeachment would be the House of Representatives having these articles of impeachment where you would say this person is no longer fit to serve. It would give the reasons. There would be a vote. It then would be passed over to the Senate, where there would be a trial, and they would have this trial in the Senate, and then have a vote up or down as to whether this person would be removed. And it has to be, as I recall, 2/3 of a vote, which with a Harry Reid controlled, Harry Reid, that was the last guy, Chuck Schumer. Controlled Senate. You can tell I'm old, there. But with a Chuck Schumer controlled Senate, it's just not going to happen. But the pressure that the public needs to put on the administration, on their leadership, on their elected officials, they ought to be talking to them. They ought to be talking to their senators, ought to be talking to their representatives if they think this is going in the wrong direction. And the more oversight that we have, the more tough questions that we ask, hopefully that modifies some behavior, but doesn't always.
So on that note, there is a very big lawsuit happening, the SEC versus Ripple, over the digital asset XRP. Through the discovery phase and some whistleblower organizations doing FOIA requests, there were reports and emails and things that were released showing possible ethics violations, with Bill Hinman and Ethereum giving a speech saying Ethereum is not a security. And a lot of folks are not happy about this. Your colleagues, Warren Davidson and Tom Emmer, have brought that up in discussions with folks at the SEC. Are there any plans to open an investigation into that?
Not that I'm aware of, that there's going to be at least a congressional investigation. If there's some of those other outside investigations, it may occur. Right now we're winding down the Democrats' control with Maxine Waters as our chair. January 3, when we elect a speaker and we take the majority, that's when we're going to be starting to ramp that up. So at this point, I'm unaware that there is any specific effort by Chair Waters or anybody else. And we'll have to review that as we're going, moving forward.
I want to talk to you about the digital dollar.
Yeah.
So every central bank around the world is tokenizing on the blockchain, their fiat currencies. There's talks of the digital dollar coming, the Fed doing pilot tests. Yeah. And there's a lot of benefits to that. Lots of benefits economically and moving up funds. However, my big concern, and a lot of folks are concerned, will it maintain a right to privacy and adhere to the Constitution? What are your thoughts on that?
Very concerned as well. And that was actually part of our principal statement that I talked about kind of at the beginning that we had put together as a committee, is we wanted it to have the characteristics of cash, anonymity being one of those, right? And look, we've all seen, whether it's in Canada or China or other places, we have seen this creeping social score coming into your decisions of what to do with your money based on your beliefs and maybe what you post and maybe what you say. And that's very, very dangerous territory. I mean, this is truly George Orwell's 1984 kind of material, in my opinion, where we suddenly, this didn't happen overnight, but we suddenly find ourselves kind of looking around going, what in the heck just happened here? And what do you mean I can't access my own money? Well, you don't deserve it. Well, that's not how this has worked previously. Private property rights is ensconced in the Constitution. That right of privacy is ensconced in the Constitution. There have been a lot of efforts to chip away at that. And Tony, as you point out, I think that is exactly the problem that we would be facing if this is not done properly. And, I'm not sure I quite understand this rush to have this happen. And this is kind of one of those issues that scrambles among conservatives and liberals and Republicans and Democrats. It kind of doesn't matter. It's just more of a sort of a worldview, because there's some very conservative people who all believe full on, that digital dollar needs to happen, and the Fed and the central bank need to run it. And then you've got some on the left who are like, whoa, time out, where are we going on this? And vice versa. So, I'm very, very cautious about that. I'm a firm believer in our personal privacy and our constitutional rights, and I see a lot of pitfalls.
So is it part of it too, is the global competition? China has their digital yuan. They're looking to inject it in different markets that they're going to industrialize, so to speak. And the US dollar is the world reserve currency. So is that, part of the urgency for some folks like the Fed?
Yeah, that is part of the argument towards that urgency. There is no doubt. But I would caution anybody just needs to look at what has happened in China with their own citizenry.
Sure.
What makes them think that, just because they're in Africa or Asia, somewhere else, or in South America, that they're not going to do the exact same thing. And, so suddenly you want to protest in the streets? Sorry, you can't get to your bank account.
Yeah.
That's a very real concern.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hoping we can get it right and not follow that model.
Yeah.
Final crypto question here before we hit the wrap up. Are you optimistic we can get some sort of legislation through in 2023, whether it be stable coins or actually comprehensive crypto regulations, whether it be later in 2023, but we can get enough members of Congress on board?
Tony, great being with you. Sorry, I gotta go. Look, I mean, that's going to be the tough part, right? And you're going to have consensus. And as I had said earlier, we were starting to get some consensus on the stable coin, for example. We've been working with the Senate. I met with Senator Lummis from Wyoming, maybe a month and a half ago or so. There's some others that are working on it over there. So we're gonna have to find our way in the House. We're gonna have to figure out how we get 60 votes together in the Senate, and then have an administration that's open to it. And frankly, they're going to be using Gary Gensler as one of those advisors on these things, as to whether they should or shouldn't be signing bills into law. So I would say I'm cautiously optimistic. There certainly will be effort put into it. In fact, I would have said that would have been probably our number one priority issue up until FTX blew apart. I think that is absolutely a goal of soon-to-be Chair Patrick McHenry, and I think it's a goal of many of us on the committee. Question is how are we going to be able to drive enough consensus? Because we can pass anything in the House with a simple majority.
Sure.
And I would imagine, actually, by definition, is going to be bipartisan, because you're going to have some in the Democrat Party who just are not going to go along with it, some in the Republican Party who aren't going to go along with it. Others of us that are on this particular issue are able to find consensus. But then we also have to find those 60 votes in the Senate. So let's chalk it up as a cautiously optimistic, but it's going to be a lot of hard work.
Well, I appreciate you fighting on behalf of the industry. I feel we got to get it right. I love the United States of America. I love living here. And I see a lot of companies, like just recently Nexo said, hey, we're halting services in the US. We're only going to operate overseas. And I'm like, that's a sad situation.
Yeah. And we shouldn't put our citizenry in that spot, because starting out, it's not going to go away. It's not. We're just going to drive it offshore. And then you're forcing people here in the United States to have a difficult decision as well. Are they going to break the law technically, or are these companies going to break the law? And suddenly you are creating criminals where criminals don't exist.
Exactly. Wrap up questions for you.
Yep.
Rapid fire. Favorite food?
I think I will go with a good steak. Actually, I know exactly what my final meal would be, but it would be a really, really good glass of wine, a steak. And since, calories don't matter, at that point, a loaded baked potato.
Nice. Favorite musician or band?
In addition to the 80s, I love anything coming out of the 80s. More contemporary, 21 Pilots. We're a huge 21 Pilots fans in our family.
Wow. I didn't expect that.
I've actually seen them in concert 4 times.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Yep.
Favorite movie?
It's a Wonderful Life, the original black and white version with Jimmy Stewart. You can't beat that. And if that's not available, Princess Bride.
I love It's a Wonderful Life. Favorite book?
My favorite book goes back to a guy named Louis L'Amour. And Louis L'Amour wrote Westerns, right?
My dad loves Louis L'Amour.
Well, your dad and I would have a lot in common on this. And make sure your dad's read this one. It's called Education of a Wandering Man. And I read it fairly early on. And it's an autobiography, actually. It's not his Westerns. It's the story of his life. And he grew up in the Depression, had to literally hit the rails. He became a hobo, as they called him back in the day, when he was like 15, ended up lying about his age to join the Merchant Marine.
Wow.
But he read hundreds of books. Think of that, hundreds of books every year. He would sometimes go through a book and a half a day. And he loved to read. And here was his point in the whole thing. It doesn't really truly matter what your formal education is. Successful people will always have this thirst for learning. And are you going to go out and take that on and be willing to learn something new every day? And I took that lesson very early on. And that's one of the things, frankly, I love about this job. And my wife used to call it my good daddy job. We have 5 kids, 24 now down to 16.
Wow.
But, you could ask daddy anything, right? How does a power plant work? How does asparagus grow? How does a car engine work? And it's part of my job is to learn a little bit about everything.
Sure.
And then you have to take these deep dives onto certain issues. But that's what I love about this job is it's new and different every day. I get exposed to phenomenal people with great ideas, people smarter than I, that I get to pick their brain. I get to understand where they're coming from. And that I think ought to be all of our goal as we're going through life.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm the same way. I always love learning. And I have to tell my dad about that book. I don't know if you read it, but he's a big Louis L'Amour fan.
Yeah. Love it.
Finally, what do you do for a hobby, pastime?
So I like to read, but I also like to play golf, and I like to hunt and duck hunt mostly. And then watch football, especially pro football. My Lions, hottest team in the NFL right now.
Yeah. Congressman Huizenga, pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate you fighting on behalf of the industry and innovation in America. And, thank you for joining me.
You got it. Thanks for having me, Tony. I really appreciate it. It's lots of fun.